I hope you can see you see the main slide now.
Yes.
My talk is called British Boys Fall Behind Girls in Educational Achievement in All Stages of Our Educational System. I'm speaking primarily about the English system today, but generally this applies to all countries of the United Kingdom. My name is Gijsbert Stoet. You can say Gilbert. I'm a Dutch citizen. I work as a professor in psychology at the University of Essex. I will talk about all the different stages very shortly though. So we have, of course, in England, the early years foundation stage until the age of 5, then followed by primary education, followed by secondary education, and for quite a good number, tertiary education. In all these stages, boys fall behind girls, and I will tell you more about that now. Let's start with the early years foundation stage. There are around 17 broad expectations for children in this age group, and these are monitored really well by the providers, like the nurseries and so on. Many boys and girls actually do not meet the expectation, which is not that big of a surprise, given that some of these expectations are actually quite high from what we really can compare cognitively from a child aged 5. But what is important here is that far more boys than girls do not meet the expectations. Boys, in a study that was done a couple of years ago, boys scored lower in 16 out of 17 of the subject areas. The only subject area in which they did not score lower was technology. Now, of course, this is at a very basic, simple level. One possibility for the general difficulties of children is that, as I said, we probably want too much from children. There is a debate about that. But one important thing is we know that boys' language development is slower. For example, at age 1, we know that boys have a smaller vocabulary than girls, irrespective of the educational level of parents. What is really clear here, the bottom line, is that the data show clearly that this so-called boy problem in schools starts early. Next, with primary education, there are performance data from Key Stage 1, for example. They are very difficult to access for researchers. And at the end, I want to say something about the difficulty of access to fundamentally important data. But what we generally know about boys in this age group around the world is this. For example, if we look at stuttering, we know that that is 3 to 10 times more likely to occur in boys than in girls. Dyslexia occurs 5 to 10 times more. Color blindness is almost exclusively a male problem, but affects you, for example, when the teacher says, well, look at the green and the red arrows on the screen. Not everybody is aware of the fact that that is, for some children, really a big problem. And those are almost all boys. And then there is a variety of attentional problems, such as ADHD, attentional deficit disorder, and autism spectrum disorder. Again, 3 to 10 times more often. There are ranges. It depends a little bit on the definition of the problem or on the specific age group that we look at. There are long waiting lists. That is what I hear from schools for seeing, for example, language support services, which is, of course, then an extra challenge, because we see that many kids would generally benefit from one-to-one help with language development. 90% of children that are being excluded in primary school are boys. This is a very large number. Now, of course, in primary school, not that many children generally are being excluded, not as many as in secondary education, but it really surprised me that almost all these kids are boys, and this suggests that schools really struggle with the behavior of boys. Now, if we move on to secondary education, here, if we look at the achievement, boys fall behind girls in nearly all GCSE subjects, and that's really almost all, except for mathematics and other sciences. And when we say fall behind, that means that, for example, they are less likely to get the highest grade, and their average grade is lower. Then secondary education, right? Far fewer boys than girls stream through to the A levels. There we see that in the A levels, 45% of all the students are boys. So that's a big drop. Also in the A levels, we see that boys fall behind girls, and in nearly all levels. There are different ways of defining that. For example, how many get A grades or the average score. But what's important, they stream through to tertiary education, but again, so far fewer boys than girls. Again, we have something like a 5% to 6% participation difference. Those that do go to university, the boys that do go to university, of course, then they're men, they achieve less well. That, for example, fewer men than women are awarded first-class degrees. Also, you see it in the dropout. Internationally, so you can ask, okay, is this a British problem? Is this an English problem? Or do we see this internationally? The boy problem in schools is actually an international phenomenon. I think that is really important to understand. It's seen across all ethnic and socioeconomic groups. So it is not the case that if you are from a better-to-do family, that you sort of like as a boy are protected from this. That's not the case. And in some discussions, it is often we talk about working class boys. Of course, there is a problem there, but you have the same problem in other parts of the society as well. Boys fall behind in terms of reading skills around the world. This is a very well documented problem. We have written several articles about this problem. And the issue here is that language skills, as we've shown, are important for non-language subjects as well, whether it's history or mathematics or even physics. And we have shown, for example, that if we know how well a child reads at age 15, we can predict whether they will go to university or not. What does not seem to play a role, and I think this is also important to mention, there is no evidence that this is related to the feminization of education, which sometimes you read about in the newspapers. There's no actual evidence for that, at least not that I've seen. Also, sometimes people talk about boys without a father, which of course is a problem for those boys. But what we see in the data are that children from single parent families are more likely to struggle. That's actually true for boys and for girls. But what happens to boys, I think, is that multiple problems come together. So then being in a single parent family, plus all the other problems that they already might have, then reach a point where they, for example, drop out, whereas some girls might still do fine. Okay, final slide here, a summary and ways to change. So the bottom line is boys fall behind in almost all subject areas, and this starts very early. There is something like what we call a leaking pipeline. So all children go through a sort of like pipeline from 0 to 18. Some will drop out, but for boys, it's far more likely to drop out at some point, and you see that at every stage. The causes are in part, and I think this is an important thing, poor language skills, because language is a key to understanding other subjects than language and literature. We also have the different speeds in development at different age groups. So that's especially in the early years foundation stage, but also during the early years of puberty. For example, when boys are longer playful than girls, so girls mature a little bit more quickly, which helps them to be more responsible, for example, for their homework. The school environment generally is less attractive to boys than to girls. Solutions will include, from the evidence, I would say, having seen this, teacher training really lacks currently, and therefore needs to include some more developmental psychology on actual sex differences. How do boys differ, for example, in language development, and at which age is this critical? There's a clear need for investment in raising literacy skills, like also in some other countries, like in the Netherlands, similar problem. We need more encouragement for reading for fun. One of the problems for boys here is that there's a lot of attractive distraction, such as playing games, which boys do more than girls. And finally, or almost finally, we need better support for children in need. So, and that this is actually true for boys and for girls, but we need access to Thrive groups, psychological support and language support. Again, I mean, sometimes long waiting lists for language support can hamper children. And finally, and this is really also about my own work, so the UK is actually outstanding in the way it monitors centrally how well children do in our schools. The UK can be proud of the National Pupil Database. I find it phenomenal what we accomplished. But the data are sort of like in some sort of like a place where nobody can access it. I have tried. It's extremely hard. Currently, the National Pupil Database seems to be completely closed off for research. And this actually hampers our understanding of the problems that schools have. So if we spend a lot of money of collecting these data, it should be used. And I hope that this is also something that can be looked into. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.